Okay, it's working good. All right, what I want to share with you today, I want to go through some dinim of eiruv tavshilin, and I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint which I've got prepared on this. Here we are. All right, so here we're going to be talking about eiruv tavshilin. Eiruv tavshilin, as you know, is meant to be done whenever Yom Tov is on a Friday. So what is the eiruv tavshilin? So eiruv tavshilin is what I've got over here is a mechanism. It's which Chazal instituted to be able to prepare on Yom Tov, which is Friday, to prepare food, etc. for Shabbos. Now in the Gemara is in Gemara Beya, and it talks about two reasons for this takona of eiruv tavshilin. The word eiruv means to combine, to blend, and tavshilin is the cooking, and it's to combine the cooking of Shabbos for Shabbos and the cooking for Yom Tov. So there's two reasons given in the Gemara. One is covered Shabbos and one is covered Yom Tov. So let's start with the covered Shabbos. Zochreihu me'acher shebo lehashkichoi. Remember the Shabbos from something which otherwise is likely to cause it to be forgotten. What that means is you've got you're celebrating Yom Tov, and you've got so many people coming for eating food and enjoying, and it could be that by the time it comes Shabbos, all the food for Yom Tov has been finished, and so the Chazal were worried about that. They saw that people were forgetting that there's a Shabbos coming. So they said before Shabbos, before Yom Tov starts, you should already do something to remember that Shabbos is also coming. So that's the expression, Zochreihu me'acher shebo lahashkichai. Remember the Yom Tov, remember the Shabbos because something is likely otherwise to make it to be forgotten. Yankel, can you deal with the people waiting in the waiting room? Yeah. Thank you. Right.
They're asking. I'm trying to deal with it. Something's funny. There's a lot of the baby Philip's name is coming up.
Yes, I noticed. Yeah. Now, then covered Yom Tov. What is the covered Yom Tov aspect? That normally, as you know, on Yom Tov you're not allowed to do melacha for after Yom Tov, as it says the pasuk, Ach asher ye'ochel lochem. That which you will be eating on Yom Tov, hu levado ye'oso lachem, that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. And so, on Yom Tov, l'moshe, you're not allowed to cook. If Yom Tov is on a Tuesday, you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Wednesday. You're not allowed to cook for a nochri on Yom Tov, because the nochri is not part of Yom Tov. So that's not lochem. So here, it comes when Yom Tov is on Friday. We are cooking on Yom Tov for the day after Yom Tov. I mean, here in Chutz La'aretz, the second day of Shavuos happens to be Shavuos also. But in Eretz Yisrael, for example, you're cooking on Yom Tov for after Yom Tov. So then the people who are not so learned, so they will say, oh, if Yom Tov on a Friday is allowed to cook for after Yom Tov, so then when Yom Tov is on a Wednesday also, on a Tuesday, you can cook for the next day also. There's a confusion here. So therefore, Chacham instituted you could only cook on Yom Tov for after Yom Tov, only if you started before Yom Tov. So then, when the less knowledgeable people will talk about it, and they say, you see, on Yom Tov, which is on a Friday, you're allowed to cook for after Yom Tov. So the response to that will be, well, there they started the cooking for Yom Tov earlier. So the cooking for Shabbos was started before. But stamazay, in the middle of a Yom Tov, to start making a cake for tomorrow, that's not allowed. So that was a kind of a takana to ensure, since covered Yom Tov has been compromised a little bit, there's been a little bit of leeway given that you are allowed to do something on Yom Tov, so that this shouldn't be carried overboard. Therefore, they made this sakana of the eiruv tavshilin. Now, the difference between there's several differences lahalacha between these two reasons. One of them is, does the eiruv tavshilin have to be done mamash erev Yom Tov? Because if you say the word is that you have to have started before Yom Tov, mitzad covered Yom Tov, so then let's say when you have a Tishri, and you have Rosh Hashanah is Thursday, Friday, and Sukkot, the first 2 days, is also Thursday, Friday, and Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeres is also Thursday, Friday. So you have 3 times you need an eiruv tavshilin. How about putting one eiruv tavshilin for all 3 Yom Tovim? So if it's because of covered Yom Tov, it would be adequate. You've made it. Anyone ask how you're cooking on Simchas Torah for Shabbos Bereishis? Oh, because we started before. When? 3.5 weeks ago. It doesn't matter. But if it is that you don't want Shabbos needs to be forgotten because of the excitement of Yom Tov, so it has to be in the heat of the moment. When you are kochen zach, when you take kochen zach, you're cooking for Yom Tov. At that time, that's when the worry is that Shabbos might be overlooked. So the eiruv tavshilin has to be b'mamish erev Yom Tov. This is one of the nafkaminas between these two shittas of covered Shabbos and covered Yom Tov, and lechatchila it has to be done erev Yom Tov mamish, and b'diavad if it was done earlier it would be yotze. Let's go on further. When is an eiruv tavshilin required? So it's required if you want to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. We're going to see what happens if you're not going to cook. For example, if you are eating all your meals, you're eating out of the house. So you're not going to be doing any, most like I was once in Kfar Chabad with my family, and we stayed in an empty house, my aunt's house. She was away for Yom Tov, and we stayed there, but every meal we ate with a different cousin, Baruch Hashem. So now, did we need to make an eiruv tavshilin? We weren't doing any cooking for one day to the other. By the way, it was the same kvias as this year. It was Shavuos, and Shavuos was a Friday, so we needed an eiruv tavshilin, but we weren't doing any cooking. So if you're not doing any cooking, Zef, you don't need an eiruv tavshilin. The next question is, what about lighting candles? Because as I say, we were staying in an empty house. So who has a chiyuv of making sure that there's light over there? It's our chiyuv. So we have a chiyuv. Yeah, my wife, my chiyuv, doesn't matter. It's called shelo yikoshel be'etz uve'even. The first reason why we light Shabbos candles is that you shouldn't stumble over stuff. So you have to have light. You shouldn't. Then there's another reason that you should add to enhance to the oineg Shabbos. It should make the meal brighter. That's the second reason. But the first reason is shelo yikoshel be'etz uve'even. You shouldn't get a stumble. So in that house where we were staying, who had a chiyuv? We had our own chiyuv to make sure that there's light there. It's true, there's electricity. So we're yotze with electricity, but the chiyuv is there. So my wife, was going to bench licht by my aunt's house, in this empty house. So now, do you make an eiruv tavshilin? If it's just for lighting candles, do you need to make an eiruv tavshilin? So the psak which I was given then was, it's a suffix, a machlokas rishonim, and therefore to make an eiruv tavshilin, but without saying the bracha sheketshon b'tzvesa v'tzivanu al mitzvahs eiruv. So it's a bit of suffix. What's the suffix? Because according to Shitas HaRambam, he holds that you don't need an eiruv. Let's say if you didn't make an eiruv, so there's a ganze parasha. You can't cook freely. Yeah, if you wouldn't make an eiruv, you wouldn't. What do I have in the first sefer in the Sivim B'Stei Shlichus? I have a situation of a shliach in a small place, and he is the only from Yid, and he forgot to make an eiruv tavshilin. So normally, what happens if you forgot to make an eiruv tavshilin? You go to the Rav, and the Rav says, you know what? I make an eiruv tavshilin. I was moitzi everyone. I made a kinyan for everyone else who didn't have an eiruv tavshilin. But he is in a little shtetl in Shlichus, and there's no other Rav there. Yeah, he's the Rav, and he forgot. And he can't call up and ask a shayla what to do because the Rabbanim don't answer the telephone on Yom Tov. Yeah, So now, so what do we do? So then it's quite limiting. If you didn't make an eiruv tavshilin, then you can only cook mamish just one food for Shabbos. So you shouldn't be starving, but you can't, make a bahar chova as you normally would, because you didn't make eiruv tavshilin. You're not allowed to cook freely. So now, what about lighting candles? So the halacha is that if you did not make an eiruv tavshilin, so the halacha remains you can light only one single candle. So you shouldn't be mamish in the dark, but to light candles are plenty. There should be lots of light. You're not allowed to, because you didn't make eiruv tavshilin. According to the Rambam, you don't need an eiruv tavshilin to light candles. In other words, he says the eiruv tavshilin is to allow you to cook, but it's not needed to allow you to light candles. In our nusach, let's go down a minute. I'm going to show you the nusach of eiruv tavshilin. So here can you see? To light candles. So in our eiruv tavshilin, we say with this we will be permitted to light candles. The Rambam doesn't have those two words in his nusach, because according to the Rambam, then the eiruv tavshilin is only for cooking, not for other things. So coming back to that shaila, if we are in a place where the only thing we're going to do for Shabbos is lighting candles, so then the eiruv tavshilin should be done without a bracha, because the shittas Rambam, for this you don't need an eiruv tavshilin. What else? What about if I wanted to have taka? I'm eating erev bavoike v'tzohoroyim. I'm going to be eating by my family, but I want to have a kettle. I want to have a Shabbos urn, so that I should be able to have a cup of tea. So for setting up a kettle, so in my aunt's apartment, I want to have a Shabbos kettle, and that to pour in water into that would be prepare malacha of cooking from Yom Tov to Shabbos. So for that alone, I would have to make an eiruv tavshilin and the pashtus with a bracha. Okay, right. When is the eiruv tavshilin done? So it's done on erev Yom Tov, as we just discussed. What about the night before? In other words, Yom Tov is going to be Thursday evening. Could you make the eiruv tavshilin on Wednesday evening? It's already erev Yom Tov. That's already a shtickle suffix, and l'chatchila you avoid it. You make it on erev Yom Tov mamish. Who should make the eiruv? Every balabais. It doesn't need to be every member of the family, but every balabais where there's going to be a cooking and catering for a family. So the balabais makes it for everyone, but you can't be moitzi your neighbor, yeah. Your neighbor is next door. Rabbi, I don't know how to do these things. Do it for me. Have me in mind. When you write a pigeon to the Rebbe, write my name also. That's for the pigeon. That's okay. When it comes for the eiruv tavshilin, you have to say no. You have to make your own eiruv. I can give you a challah. I can give you a piece of fish, and you will make an eiruv. But I cannot moitzi you l'chatchila with my eiruv. As I'm storing the Gemara about a person who forgot to make an eiruv tavshilin, and he came to the Chacham, and the Chacham said, yeah, you can be yotze with mine, because I had in mind, I made a kinyan for everyone. When he came the next time round, the Chacham said, I see that you're being careless about this. For everyone else can rely on my eiruv, but not you. So you cannot be moitzi someone else with the eiruv, unless they are, obviously, if they're part of your household. Let's go on. Right. What is the eiruv made of? The eiruv is made of two foods. One is a baked food, as in a challah or a matzah, and one is a cooked food. It has to be a kabetza of challah, and it should be a kazayas of food, of cooked food. The way the Alter Rebbe says, and let's go to that next slide. You see here the Alter Rebbe says you should yikach hapas habe'erev Yom Tov hapas mishabes. So minadin, it says in Shulchan Aruch, even a slice of a chaticha, even a piece of bread, which is the size of a kabetza, that's enough for eiruv tavshilin. But l'chatchila, the Alter Rebbe says, is lashon yikach hapas mishabes. You should take a challah from Shabbos. And as you may know, that many people have the minhag is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, a minhag toiv, that since you did one mitzvah with this challah to use it for eiruv tavshilin, so you should use it for another mitzvah. And so you use it for lechem mishneh for Friday night, and then you use it again for lechem mishneh for Shabbos by day. And if you are one of those people who eat shalosh shudas, yeah, you can't throw any towels at me now. Yeah. So now, if you are having shalosh shudas, so then you'll use that. You'll use it for lechem mishnah for shalosh shudas, and you'll eat it then. So again, so perhaps that's why the Alter Rebbe says Yikach Hapas Mishabes, in order to be able to be to this hidur of doing using it again and again. There's a beautiful sikha of the Rebbe on that about using the challah again and again, but we're not going to go into that. Okay. We then have here the loshin, the question about the eiruv. I told you the neighbor cannot be yotze with my eiruv. Oh, and now we had the question also, which we discussed before. Let's say we have a group of students who are sharing the same apartment, but they're eating out all the meals. Do they need to make an eiruv of their own? And their answer is, if they are lighting in their apartment, lighting candles, then they should make an eiruv tavshilin without a bracha. If they're putting out hot water, or etc., then they can make an eiruv tavshilin with a bracha. If you remember, we discussed at a recent shir about adding cold water to the hot water urn. Do you remember that? To add cold water to hot water urn could raise a question of activating the thermostat. So we said two solutions. Either you pour in hot water, which is being boiled in another pot, or you make sure that the thermostat has switched the kettle on. You can see the red light is on, whatever it may be, and then you will then add your cold water whilst it's on. So instead of it going on for the next 30 seconds, it will go on for the next 5 minutes. And that's okay, because you're just prolonging the matziv that it is now. You're making it last longer. Okay, let's go on. We're going to look here now the Alter Rebbe's Loshen. This is the Nusach HaErev. Yom Tov is on Thursday and Friday, or Friday and Shabbos. So you take on Erev Yom Tov, which in this case is going to be on Thursday. You take Pas Shabbos, we said. Now, could you use a mezonos bun for Erev Tavshilin? And Minadin, yes, it's also called Pas. Could you use that? There's lots of discussion about eiruv tavshilin. I want to show you something. Just a moment. Can you read what's written on this, the front of this sefer? So it's 2 volumes. That's called Eiruv Tavshilin Ha'aruch. I think they should have spelled it with an aleph, because to have 750 pages on Eiruv Tavshilin is quite aruch. At any rate, so he talks about this, about having a mezonos, and it would be okay. Here's also an interesting thing. What about an eiruv tavshilin which you would not eat on the erev Yom Tov, but perhaps for Shabbos you would eat it? For example, we would not eat machine matzah on Pesach. Let's say in Eretz Yisrael this year, the last days was Friday and Shabbos. So Achron Shel Pesach in Eretz Yisrael is already Istru Chag. So it's okay to have the machine matzah, and you can if you have it in your house. So could you make an eiruv tavshilin with a matzah which at the time of erev Yom Tov you wouldn't be able to eat it, and on Yom Tov by the time Shabbos comes in you would be able to? Or let's say we don't eat gibroks other than Achron Shel Pesach. If your tavshil is a tavshil of gibroks, let's say you make some schnitzel. Some people will make, even though they don't eat gibroks during Pesach, but they will have a separate pot. They'll cook up some schnitzel and put away that pot, and they won't use it till next year. So could you use for the tavshil, does it have to be edible on Erev Yom Tov, or so long as it's edible for Shabbos, you're okay? Possibly this depends on covered Shabbos or covered Yom Tov. If it's covered Shabbos, so then by the time Shabbos comes, it's going to be okay. That would be good. If it's covered Yom Tov, well then perhaps no, it has to be edible on Yom Tov. So the poskim do discuss it. Now in olden times, it was more, the Alter Rebbe says you should take with a tavshil, bosser oidag. It should be a piece of meat or a piece of fish. you may have seen people doing eiruv tavshilin with a boiled egg. The reason why people tended to use boiled eggs rather than fish or meat is because it was one way of making sure that it keeps fresh, keeps edible. Because if you keep meat for a couple of days, it might spoil. And so they used eggs which keep better without fridges. See, in the olden times, they had, you know how they kept their chickens fresh for Yom Tov? Very simple. They kept them alive. And then on Yom Tov, they take the live chicken to the shoichet, and it shecht it. So they had fresh chicken. That was one way to keep it alive because they didn't have fridges. So my father, Alav Shalom, he was brought up in Leningrad, and they didn't have a sukkah. So he told me there was one sukkah in the shul, and there wasn't enough space for everyone to sit there. So they would have, people would come, the Chassidim particularly would come, and they would take shifts, and they would sleep in the Arbeiber shul, they'd sleep, whatever it was. They were there for, and he says the first day, so they brought with, and when it was 3 days, 2 days of Yom Tov and Shabbos following, so they brought with food for the 3 days. So the first day, the food was warm. The second day, the food was cold. And the third day, the food was fashmekt. Fashmekt means it had gone off. So that's how they lived. But really, we see here, that's why people used to use boiled eggs. Some people still insist on using boiled eggs. But the way we have here is it should be a bossa or dag, it should be something choshev. I think most of us don't serve boiled eggs for the main course on Shabbos and Yom Tov, yeah? It's a bit out of place. Boiled egg, unfortunately, when there's an oval, the first meal of an oval, so they give him a bagel, or her, a boiled egg, but it's not a choshev food. So it's more choshev to use a piece of meat, a piece of fish, which would be a kazayis. You put it aside. That's right. And so then that's what you're going to use. You're going to use hapas mishabes. You're going to use a piece of fish a piece of fish or a piece of meat. Don't need to have both. And now, then we want to be mitzi in case someone else forgets. So what I do is, and I'm sure your parents, if our fathers also do the same, you take the 2 items of the eiruv tavshilin, and you have a neighbor or someone, and you give them, you say, can you be koine this? Lift it up to be koine on behalf of anyone else who may want to rely on my eiruv. So here we have, he gives it to someone else to be zoicha alechol hakol, for anyone in the community who may have need to rely on the eiruv. And with this, the balabos, he says, ani mezake, I am, with this act, I'm giving it for a kinyan for anyone who will want to be koine, to be zoicha, to be koine, and to rely on this eiruv. He then gives it to the other party, and the other party lifts it a tefach, because that's called kinyan hagboho. Now, kinyan hagboho is a machlokas Rashi Tosfos, where there has to be 3 tefachim or 1 tefach, but that's for kinyan, when it said for din deraisa, for din drabonon, a tefach hagboh of a tefach is enough. So here we have the halacha of magbia tefach. So I've given it. Let's say Reb Chaim is my neighbor. I give Reb Chaim to lift up the eiruv. He lifts it up a tefach, the challah and the fish, and he gives it back to me. And then I make the bracha asheket shonu b'mitzvos v'tzivonu al mitzvas eiruv. And then I say this lashon in Aramaic. Now it has to be understood. If I know what I'm saying, then it works. If I think it's a tefillah that Yor Alav Ruach Mimorem and Yush Pashev Harav, that doesn't work. It's a declaration of my intent. So I have to understand this, and if I don't, I should say it in language in which I do understand, whether it's in English or in Hebrew or in whatever other language, as long as you understand what you're saying. Yeah. So let's read what those words are saying. B'dein, which is bazeh. Yehei shora lana. With this, it will be mutter to us, permitted to us. La'afuye levashule, to bake and to cook. So really, you're allowed to bake on Yom Tov, yeah? I think we discussed this not long ago. It's not practical nowadays because we always use machines. But before the machines were used for baking, it was quite simple. You would have a bowl and mix up some flour and put it in the oven, and you would bake on Yom Tov. You had fresh bread baked on Yom Tov. And I told you, I think, also that some shofar would have even baking matzahs. When Pesach was on Motzei Shabbos, so Motzei Shabbos, they would bake matzahs, have mamash fresh matzahs on Pesach Benai, they would make before the Seder. All right. Well, latmuna. You know what latmuna is? That's to wrap up food that should remain warm. and to light the candle. And we discussed this, that this is the machlokas harishonim, whether it's necessary to have an erev tavshilin to allow you to light candles, and so we are following the more strict opinion that you need to have an erev tavshilin to allow you to light candles from one day to the next. To do anything else. Now, there's an interesting thing. Number one, in the Siddur, the din of eiruv tavshilin, the Seder of eiruv tavshilin is next to eiruv chatzeres. And in the eiruv chatzeres, it says, with this eiruv, it will be mutter for us, la'ayule ula'afuke, to carry in and to carry out. But here, it doesn't say in the eiruv tavshilin that you'd be allowed to carry in and to carry out. Actually, one of the Rishonim does have it, but we don't have it. Most Neschos don't have it. Why is it not there? Very simple. Because the eiruv tavshilin only allows you to do things got to do with food. It doesn't allow you to do preparations on Yom Tov for Shabbos which are not food related. Had it been written la yule la afuke, you might have thought that you're allowed to carry non-food items also, and so it was left out dafke. And therefore, back to those words lemevad kol tzorchono. So that's also, it's only kotzorchono have to do with food, not anything else. So one very interesting example, there is a din that ein goylin is at Sefer Torah b'tzibur, that you should not be rolling the Sefer Torah in front of the congregation. It's not derech eretz for the people who are standing there, or sitting there in a shul, and you're standing there and rolling the Sefer Torah. You should have prepared it before. It's not respectful for the tzibur to expect them to be standing and waiting. I don't know if any of you are learning Gemara Sota. You have there about Kovod HaTzibur. Just recently it came up about Kovod HaTzibur is even greater than Kovod HaShechina. So you have there this idea of Kovod HaTzibur. Thank you, Mendel. So now, Alter Rebbe says that you're not allowed to roll the Sefer Torah on one day of Yom Tov for the next. And he says further, even on Yom Tov, which is a Friday, and you made an erev tavshilin, that wouldn't allow you to roll the Sefer Torah for Shabbos. Now, it's quite practical. There are some shuls which only have davening in the morning. And so you want to finish, after Musaf, roll the Sefer Torah for tomorrow's reading. So you're not allowed to. In our shul, B'derech Klal, the Gaber does it after Ma'ariv. After Ma'ariv is already the next day already, so then he rolls the Sefer Torah that it should be ready in time for the morning's Kriya. So there you have an example of not doing any. That's even a tircha. It's not a melacha at all. To roll a Sefer Torah is just a tircha, just an effort, and even that should not be done from one day to the next, even if you have an erev tavshilin. Now here's an interesting point. Can you carry a siddur? Can you carry a sefer? Let's say it's going to be Friday and Shabbos, and on Shabbos you want to learn a particular sefer in a different house. Would you be on Friday afternoon be allowed to carry the sefer to the other house to use it on Shabbos? So he says, you wouldn't be allowed to. A man wants to take his talus. That Shabbos morning he wants to daven in a different place. So he wants on Friday take his talus to the other place. Since we don't usually eat talesim, so it's not a Michael. So then you wouldn't be allowed to carry a talus on Friday for Shabbos, even if you made an erev tavshilin. One exception would be l'chayra, if in the bag with the talus is also some food, and you carry, let's say it's Mashiach Suda, and you have in the bag there's also food, perhaps together with the food, then you have a heter to carry non-food items. Otherwise, one has to be careful not to carry from one day to the next, and even if you have an erev tavshilin, unless it's got to do with food. Let's go on. Come back. There we go. Right. May I put up a raw cholent for this Shabbos? So here, when do you make the cholent? Normally on Friday you put up a cholent. Yeah. So this Friday, which is going to be Yom Tov, You want to put up a cholent. Now, there is a way of putting up a cholent other than, not on Yom Tov. You can put up a cholent with put a piece of meat in it, and it'll continue. It's not ready before Shabbos. Usually, by us, I think most of us will say that the cholent is edible before Shabbos. But minadin, if you have a belech, etc., you can have a raw cholent, and then by the time comes Shabbos morning, it's cooked already. On Yom Tov, you're not allowed to put up food on Yom Tov, which should cook. It will only be ready Motzei Yom Tov, which is Shabbos. The reason is, Min Torah, if a person on Wednesday, Yom Tov is Tuesday, yeah, and a person went and made a kugel, what are you making the kugel for? Oh, because I'm having some friends over on Thursday, they like kugel. So he made a kugel on Tuesday for Thursday. No, they say you're not allowed to. I don't care. You'll get malchus. I don't care. Does he get malchus? And the answer is, if he made the kugel earlier in the day, where Taki, he said he made it for Thursday. But if some people suddenly, a bunch of hungry Bocharim, landed and he decided to cater for them, so the kugel will be polished off already on the Tuesday. So it's called royal hoyel ve'ilun is damnului orchim. In case there would be orchim who would come and they haven't eaten, they're never hungry, so then he wouldn't get malchus, yeah. So the Bocharim would save him from malchus. The fact that the Bocharim would the unexpected visitors would be able to enjoy this kugel, he wouldn't get malchus. What happens if he puts up the kugel 10 minutes before sunset? Or I'm sure you're big bekim like me about cooking. Let's say something like chickpeas. Chickpeas takes 2 hours to cook. So let's say he puts up chickpeas a half an hour before the skier. I'm not talking about chickpeas which are moist out coming out of a can. I'm talking about the raw, the dry ones. It takes a long time. If you would put up food on Yom Tov, doesn't matter if it's Tuesday or Friday. If you put up food so close to the end of the Yom Tov that you're doing an act of bishul, but the hanoah is not accessible until after Yom Tov is over, then he would get malchus. So again, cooking food earlier in the day for after Yom Tov is Isur D'Rabbanan. Cooking food late in the day, where it won't be edible on the day, only after Yom Tov, that's an Isur Min Torah. So when the Rabbanan permitted us to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos, that's only if you do it earlier on the day. They can be matir and Isur D'Rabbanan again. So to cook food earlier in the day, which is Isur D'Rabbanan, now you have the eiruv tavshilin, it's permitted. But to cook food close to sunset, where it won't be edible today, then you would have to. Then you wouldn't be allowed to. So therefore, Mendel, I'll come to you in a moment. Therefore, you cannot put up a raw cholent by virtue of the eiruv tavshilin. Now, have you ever seen in shuls that they say bameh madlikin on Friday night? In Yekish shuls, they say bameh madlikin. And when it comes Yom Tov, coming into Shabbos, they don't say bameh madlikin. And in our minhag, when Yom Tov comes into Shabbos, we miss out the first 5-6 kapitelach of L'chuna Ranano. We don't say it. What's the reason for this? So one reason is, listen, the Chachamim saw that it's important that the Friday night, which comes after Yom Tov, should be a short davening. Like this, at home, the women will know, it's Friday night. We must have the food has to be ready. So like this, because if it'd be a long oizgekratze davening, so they would think I can put up food based on the eiruv tavshilin, and by the time they get home, it'll be ready. But since the davening is shorter, by the time the men will come home from shul, they'll be hungry, and men who are hungry are not always the nicest people to be around. So then they'll make sure to put up the food earlier. You follow? They would make that especially shorten the davening, the length of davening when Yom Tov goes into Shabbos, where there's eiruv tavshilin, so that it should make sure that the food should be edible before Shabbos begins. Mendel Austin, you wanted to say something?
In regards to cooking food on Shabbos or Yom Tov, is there something else to do with Machal Ben Dersai?
That's a good question. Some say that machal b'draso would be enough to take off the isur, but lechatchila it should be fully edible. Yeah. So in other words, some of the Pri Megadim mentions that if it's half cooked, is also nish geferlach. Yeah. But lechatchila you should make it take edible before Yom Tov. Let's go on. Does eiruv allow you to carry clothes for Shabbos? So we mentioned before, carrying a talus. No, it would only have to be, the eiruv allows you only to carry food which you need in another location. With this, if someone forgot to make an eiruv, we discussed this already, he could go to the Rav, and if the Rav is in a good mood, he had a nice breakfast, whatever that day, so then he'll say you can rely on his eiruv. But if he got him a bit grumpy because he knows he'd keep on doing this, he'll tell you, sorry, I can't help you. Right. Someone I once told this to someone, so that's a good reason to change rabbis every few years. Okay. What we have over here, the halacha is between the two items, the food, the cooked food and the baked food. The main thing is the cooked food, and that needs explanation. We're running out of time. What's the reason why the tavshil is the more important one? Okay, I think that will be it for today, and just wish you all.
Raskin.
Yes.